Okay, well, we are continuing in a series called Heaven and Hell, and if this is your first time with us, you're like, great. Right? There's people who are like, I've wanted to hear this for a long time. There are people who are like, I invited my friends, and this is not the day that I should have invited them because this is weird. And there's people who are like, I don't care about this topic. So hopefully I could convert all of you guys into my excitement. But as you guys know, this is part 4 of the series. And if you have any questions, there's a QR code right here. We call it the question and response QR code. Excuse me. If you have any questions, or if you have any verses that we've been going over, or we haven't gone over that you want us to discuss, here it is. Okay, so if you have the app, you don't have to scan the QR code. You could just tap on the Q&R button there, and then you can ask your question there. So I would love to hear from you. I've heard from a lot of you, some people online, who usually don't come here. Some of them ask questions, and we will address those verses. So in case you're wondering, what are we talking about? We're talking about heaven and hell. It's a biblical survey, and this is what we're discovering so far. A lot of the things that you thought you knew about heaven and hell, as a matter of fact, you probably heard it on TV from preachers and all that kind of stuff. A lot of those things are not in the Bible. And here's another thing. A lot of times we use the idea of heaven and hell to scare people into becoming a Christian. That is not the way to do it. As a matter of fact, if you read through the New Testament, you'll never ever hear anybody use heaven or hell as a way to get people to join the Christian movement. So, through this series, what we're doing is we're going over different verses, and we've been doing 2 things to it. Number 1, we read through the verse that is about hell and heaven, okay? And we'll do that today. We're going to be looking through a section in the book of Luke today. And the second thing, after we discover, that's really not about hell or heaven, then we do the second thing, which is we learn the intended lesson of those verses. Like, why not, right? If there's a verse that you thought was about hell, but it's not, well, let's find out what it really is about. So today we're looking at Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. And this story has a special place in my heart. And the reason is because this is the verse that somebody used to scare me to become a Christian. It didn't work. It was actually, okay, this is embarrassing, but there's like a girl at church, and I'm like, ooh, if she's going to be a Christian, I want to be a Christian too. That's how I became a Christian, not because of this verse. But if any of you have read this verse, and this is the reason why you're like, I want to avoid that as much as I can, well, you're in for a surprise today. So let's start the story. This is Jesus teaching a group of people, like a big audience. There was a rich man. Oh, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to read through the whole story first, talk about it, and then we're going to go and break it down verse by verse. Okay, so let's just read the whole story. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus. Now, Lazarus is like a nickname for a person with the name of Eleazar. We don't have to know that. That's just like cool information. Covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. Right? You already don't like this rich man, and you have compassion for Lazarus. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, which is the Greek understanding of what happens to you after you die, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue because I am in agony in this fire. So far, just kind of giving you an overview of what's happening so far. 2 guys, they both die, and apparently it seems like they're in the same place because they could see each other. But one side is agony and the other side is comfort. And on the comfort side, a guy named Abraham is hanging out there with them. Are you following so far? And let's see what else we could learn. Oh, there's fire. There seems to be fire on the torment side. But Abraham replied, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things while Lazarus received bad things? But now he is comfortable here and you are in agony. So at surface reading, it sounds like if you're rich, you're going to go to hell. And if you're poor, you're going to be just fine. It's like, ooh, I got to start writing my checks and right? Like, ooh, what should I do with my money? That's what it sounds like it's saying. Keep going. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place. So between the comfort side and the torment side, there's like this huge chasm that you definitely can't jump over, has been set in place so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross from there to us. So like, wherever you land, that's where you are forever. And then Jesus concludes with the next part. He answered, "Oh, then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers who are still alive. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment." So he's like, I have a request. If you, I can see you, you're far away, but I guess you could hear me also. So if you can, please send Lazarus up there and warn them that this place is real. Okay? What's his answer? His answer? Well, they have Moses and the prophets. That's code for Old Testament, right? They have the Old Testament. Let them listen to those books, right? "No, Father Abraham," he said. This is the first time he says no. Like when he ends up in the torment side, he doesn't really say, "I don't deserve," like he kind of accepts it. I don't know if you noticed that. He's like, "Oh, okay." But this is the first time he objects, right? "No, Father Abraham," he said, "but if someone from the dead goes to them, then they will repent." Like, this is like the Christmas Carol story, right? Like ghost from Christmas past or whatever shows up. And he's like, "Okay, I'll change." Keep going. He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, if they don't listen to the things that we have in the Old Testament, they will not be convinced even if someone rises from the dead." And that's the end of Jesus' story. So, if you're like me when I've read this for the first time, you think, I know what this story is about. This is a story about hell. H-E double hockey stick, right? Heck. I don't know how you guys, okay. Right? And what is he saying about hell? He's saying, Jesus is giving us a description of hell. Like he's trying to scare people. Like you don't want to end up where the rich man ended up. You want to end up where Abraham and Lazarus ended up. And so he's giving us a description to scare us. That's what he's doing, right? And what does he say about this place? Well, he says, one compartment has comfort. The other compartment, is a fiery and uncomfortable place. And those two places are divided by a chasm. Did you catch that too? Like that's what I got the first time I read this, right? So let me quote you, one of my favorite scholars. His name is N.T. Wright. This is what he says about this. "It is very likely this is a well-known folk tale. Like this is not a typical parable that Jesus told. And even the word Hades, the way that it's used, shows you that this is not a Jewish story. This is not Jesus giving us a story about hell. No, this is a famous folk tale. This isn't Jesus' original story. It's a famous folk tale in the ancient world. Jesus was by no means the first to tell of how wealth and poverty might be reversed in the future life. So we have to keep this in mind. Jesus is not being original here. When he starts telling this story, people are like, I know this story. My grandpa used to tell me. Well, at least if you're Greek, that's what they would hear, okay? In fact, he says, stories like this were so well known that we can see how Jesus has changed the pattern that people would expect. So as he's telling the story, you're like, I know this story, Jesus. Why are you giving us children's stories? Why do you do? And then all of a sudden at the end of the story, he flips the script and he changes something about it. And they're like, whoa, we didn't expect that, Jesus. So that's what's happening here. So problem number one is that we don't know the original story. Like you and I, we weren't raised on these stories. And number two, if we don't know what those original stories were, then we wouldn't appreciate the twist that he puts at the end of the story. So he says, in the usual story, the way that the story is usually told in Greek culture, when someone asks permission to send a message back to the people who are still alive on earth, the permission is usually like, you bet, you could go ahead and tell your friends. But in this story, here, he's not given permission. This is the twist in the story. Abraham, please, he doesn't even say me. He doesn't say, let me go up there. He's like, tell Lazarus to go up there and tell my brothers, and maybe they'll change. And his answer is, no. And then everybody's like, whoa, Jesus, I didn't expect that part to come up in this story. That's what's happening here. So there are 3 things that we need to know before we study this passage, okay? Number 1, what we need to know about before reading. This is a retelling of a popular Greek tale, but with a twist at the end, okay? So keep that in mind. You have to know this before you read this. It's a famous story. It's not a true story. Everybody then would be like, oh, Jesus is telling us a folk tale. So we can't use this reliably as a way to talk about hell, okay? Number 2, This depiction of the afterlife is very Greek. That's why they use the word Hades or Hades, and would be unrecognizable for most Jews. So as Jesus is telling this story, they're like, this story makes no sense because it doesn't fit our theology. So like, for example, in this story, he's like, I want you to take Lazarus and send him back up. In the Jewish culture, that's called the resurrection. But the resurrection is supposed to happen at the very end of the story, but we know it's not the end of the story because he has 5 brothers that are still alive. So people are like, this makes no sense. It must be a Greek thing. Okay, so Jesus, everybody knows that Jesus at this point is borrowing a story from another culture and retelling it. Okay, and the final thing that we should know about this before we reread it is that there is no other biblical verse that resembles this type of setting. If you look through the entire Bible, and if hell is such an important part of the Bible, you would think that this would be repeated somewhere else. There's nowhere else in the Bible that describes a place where Abraham is on one side, and there's a big chasm, and there's like a place over there where it's always on fire, and you know, you can see each other, and you can hear each other apparently, but you can't cry. Like, there's nowhere else in the Bible that describes this. So, keep that in mind as we read this passage, because a lot of times, like when I was younger, people use these verses to scare you into becoming a follower of Jesus, which nobody in the Bible ever does. Nobody in the Bible ever uses hell as a dangling carrot to get you to become a Christian. So, let's keep that in mind. Are we good? You guys following? Okay, here we go. Let's start reading this story and let's look at the details. This is verse 19. There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. A few things I highlighted here for you guys. He's a rich man. And you're like, so how rich is he? Well, the description kind of gives you a clue. Okay? He was wearing purple. Purple is a color that only the rich and only kings wore. And the reason why it was so extravagant is because the specific kind of purple they could only make out of a certain dye that came from a specific seashell that was going extinct. So only the rich, and if you're rich, you have to be super rich. And in this case, Jesus even says, this guy, he did this every day. So he's not just like, oh, I have one purple shirt and everything else is regular. No, he wore purple every day. So he's already creating this caricature of a rich man that's like, so rich they doesn't know what to do with his money. He's wearing fine linen, right? And he lived in luxury. So are you getting an idea, an image of who this person is? By the way, did you notice when you read through the story the first time that this guy has no name? I don't know if you noticed that. The poor guy, he has a name. His name is Lazarus. The rich guy doesn't have a name. Do you know who else in the Bible is described by his stature but not by his name? Oh yeah, this is like good trivia. Anybody? It's in the book of Exodus. Oh man, come on. Pharaoh. Pharaoh has no name. He has no name, but we know the names of the people who helped give birth to Moses. Right? We know these small details and names of people, but Pharaoh, he has no name. And that's because his identity, who he is that he is a ruler. In this case, this guy's identity is totally wrapped in the idea that he is rich. Right? We don't know if he's a father, we just know that he's rich. We don't know if he had a job, we just know he's rich. We don't know if he had hobbies. All we know is that he's rich. His entire identity is wrapped around the idea that he's rich. So here's a quick illustration. This guy, he's the rich guy. Next slide. He wears purple. Okay? Now, what kind of house does he live in? Well, what do we know? Well, before we go to the verse where they describe his house, I want to show you what a typical home in the first century looked like. Here's like a 3D rendering that I found online. It's cool. You could like rotate it and see it from different angles. Okay. Notice this is the outside of the house. You can take the stairs to the top. Can we go to the next slide? I want to show you what it looks like from the top. Right? And there's like, usually it starts with 4 rooms and they keep adding rooms to it afterwards. But this is what it usually looks like. In the description of the house that the rich man lived in, there's a description there that is not in this illustration here, in this graphic here. You know what it is? A gate. Do you see any gates? No, right? So look at this, next verse. At his gate. So immediately when he says gate, everybody who's listening to this story is like, whoa, 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 this guy has a gate? A gate in those days is basically a way to keep certain people out and some people in. And the only people who are worthy of coming through the gate are the ones who are allowed into his property. Otherwise, it's like a public space. You can just walk, right? So he's so rich that this guy has a wall, like a fence in front of his house with a gate. Let's keep reading. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, so we have a name, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. So, illustration. Jesus is doing something genius here. He's contrasting two people. There's a rich man here, and then there's like a fence, and on the other side of the fence is a guy named Lazarus. Okay? It's Lazarus. Hello. Okay. Now, the description. This guy here wears a purple robe every day. What does Lazarus wear every day? Next slide. He wears sores every day. Clearly, he's sick. And Lazarus wants to keep the sick guy, the poor guy, out because he's like out of sight, out of mind. He has nothing to do with me. He's cutting himself off from the people who need help the most. Now, who here is able to help him? Lazarus, because he's rich. He doesn't know what to do with his money, right? But he has the funds to help other people, but he chooses not to. Right? And then we just read that Lazarus, he longed to eat the food, the bread that fell from the table. Here's the interesting thing about bread back then. If you were rich, before you eat, you wash your hands with the water that you're about to drink. So you're like, oh, I got plenty of water. I'm just going to pour it on my hands. And like, towel. I need a towel. I don't want to put on my purple robe because my purple robe is so awesome. So in those days, the rich would take bread, the excess bread they have, and they would wipe their hands on the bread. And then they will throw it to the ground so that the dogs can eat it. So next slide. So that's why Lazarus is like, maybe this rich guy would throw away one of his dirty breads and I could eat that. And he was longing to eat that. And if you're already like, I don't like this guy, right? If you're already there, here's another reason, and Jesus really doesn't want you to like this guy, this imaginary guy. Okay? Because, look at the next verse. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. In the Greek, this is written in Greek, by the way. In the Greek, there's two words for dogs. One word for dog is the word that you use on like tiny, cute dogs that are pets. You know, woof, 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 and they pee on your carpet, but you're like, it's okay, you're adorable. That kind, okay? The other kind of dog in the Greek is the word for a dog that is wild, untamed, undomesticated. The word here is that wild, undomesticated dog. And what Jesus is trying to tell us in this part of the story is the dogs, the wild dogs, had more compassion on this poor man than than the rich man did. And then the story, if you are already familiar with the old Greek version of the story, no surprise, because the next is the death scene. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. Now, what is Abraham's side? If you use a different version of the Bible, the word here, sometimes it says Abraham's bosom, Abraham's chest, Abraham's comfort. These are all good translations. In those days, rich people, when they ate, they didn't eat at a table. They reclined. This is what it would look like. I don't know if you could see that. But as you can see, some of these people are reclined. They're like on their elbow, and they're like kind of eating like this. And the VIP, this is Jesus over here, he would sit right here. The person who is the second most important person the second most important person at the table would sit on the side of the VIP, so when you lean back, your head will be in his bosom. And so in this story, what they're saying is, next slide, when he died, the angels carried him to Abraham's side, meaning this poor man, Lazarus, he was given the best seat when he was taken to the next life. A place of comfort. You okay, Bill? It's okay. We love UCLA. Right? Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going. Okay, now, Lazarus died. Let's take a look at the rich man. It says, the rich man also died, but in this case, he was actually buried. So that's a contrast. The implication here is when the rich man died, people cared about him enough that, people cared about him enough that they actually took the body and had a burial service and a funeral for him. Whereas for the poor guy, for Lazarus, he had nothing. There was nothing, like, they just forgot about him. He just probably died on the streets and the dog dragged his body off somewhere. But the detail that Jesus gives here is that, like, look, nobody was there to help him when he was alive or when he died. But the angels came and took him away. So at least somebody cared for him, right? It's such a sad story. Okay, now let's see what happens in the afterlife. In Hades, where he was in torment, this is the rich guy. He looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. It's like, what? Now, notice, he doesn't say, what am I doing here? He kind of accepts the fact that he's here, and he doesn't complain about that at all, right? Okay? And then this is called a reversal in ancient Greek literature. Suffering Lazarus ends up in a place of comfort, whereas the luxurious rich man ends up in a place of torment. Like this reversal story. And all the people who are poor are like, yeah, I love this story, it makes me feel good. That's what this is. Okay, this is how typical ancient Greek reversal stories went, okay? Okay, so let's read the next part. So, he called to him, hey, Father Abraham. Now, the word called here, okay, if you don't know Greek, this is like fascinating. You would think if this guy's in torment, in agony, he would be like, Abraham, help me, right? The word call here is like a gentle whisper. Excuse me, Mr. Abraham? Like that's what's implied here. So there's something off about this guy. So he called to him and said, Father Abraham, have pity on me and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue because I am in agony in this fire. Now what's interesting here is you would think that if he's on fire, that he would need more than just a dip of water from a fingertip, right? Like there's something that's weird about this story, right? But the part that you're supposed to really pay attention to is what the rich man is asking for here is what? He's asking somebody, he's telling Abraham, I want you to command Lazarus to do this for me. What you're supposed to pick up from this part of the story is the rich man, after he died, has not changed. He's still giving orders to people who he thinks is less than him. Right? And so the rich man is stuck in his ways. He still feels that he's above Lazarus. And he still thinks he's more important because he has more money. So much that he's like, I'm going to boss people around to do what I want to be done. This is what you're supposed to pick up from the story at this point. But Abraham, he said, son, remember in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things, but now he is comforted here and you are in agony. He is not saying if you're rich, you're going to go to the bad place. That's not what he's saying here at all. He's saying you had the comfort, you had the money, you had the resource to help people like him. And you did nothing about it. As a matter of fact, with the money you had, you built a gate, you built a wall, you built something that would say, out of sight, out of mind, I don't care about that guy. And so, now, it was up to us to give him comfort, so we did. We gave him comfort. He's sitting at the best seat next to Abraham. That's what he's saying in this story so far. Again, this is not a depiction of hell. He's using an ancient Greek tale to tell you, like, hey, let me tell you something about the disparity of the rich and the poor. That's what he's talking about here. Okay? And then he says this. This is cool. He says, and besides all this, between us and you, there's a great chasm. This is Abraham saying, I would help you, but looky here, there's a chasm. Like, he acts like he doesn't have any control over this. And I'll tell you why this is interesting. He's like, oh, looky here, there's a chasm. Too bad, right? It has been set in place. By who? We'll find out soon. So that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor anyone cross over from there to us. Okay, let's look back at the story, what we know so far. This is the scene that we saw so far. Rich man with a purple coat, wearing it every day. Poor guy wearing swords every day on the other side of this wall. Abraham is saying, hey, let's think about what you did earlier. Remember how you built that wall, that fence, that gate? Remember that? Well, that wall has turned into this. A great chasm. Who put that chasm there, rich man? I did. The division that you're creating, what you were trying to do, trying to separate yourself from the people who need you the most, well, now it's permanent. And now you're the one that's asking for help, but we can't help you because you built that wall. Right? Again, the point here is that wall, that chasm doesn't have to exist there, but you put it there and you want it to be there and you're not changing. If you change right now, maybe that chasm will go away. But no, because the rich man is stuck in his ways. Right? In other words, the artificial wall, the barrier that you created, is the chasm between you and the life God intended for you. So this story really isn't about the afterlife, is it? This is a story more about how we treat people today. Let's continue the story. He answered, "Then I beg you, Father," again, I don't want to do this. I'm going to make somebody else do it because he hasn't changed his ways yet, right? "Send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them so that they will not also come to this place of torment." Notice, he doesn't ask, "Can you send me to my brothers?" No, because he's so set in his ways that it doesn't even occur to him that he should ask him to set me free. But like, oh, no, I want my bidding to be done by Lazarus over there. Like, you guys probably heard stories like this, like in the Christmas Carol, right? Send someone else to fix my problem. That's what he's saying. He still thinks he's above Lazarus. So Abraham replied, "No, well, they have Moses and the prophets. They have the Old Testament. They don't need this. Right? They don't need Lazarus to go up there. They could just read the Old Testament, because if you read the Old Testament, there are verses in there about how to treat your neighbor. There's verses in there about how to treat the poor. There's verses in there how to treat women and how to treat other people. Like, they have the Old Testament. They're like they read through it, they heard it, they learned it since they were kids. What makes you think that a dead guy coming from the grave is going to fix all this?" Now, in usual Greek stories like this one, the story usually goes to, "Yes, I will let you go back there and change, tell your brothers," or whatever. But the answer here is no. The audience who's listening to the story is like, "What did you say, Jesus?" Like, yeah, Abraham said no, Father Abraham. "But if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent." Oh, actually, this is the rich man saying it. He says, "No. Trust me, if somebody comes from the grave, like if somebody is dead and comes to life and goes and tells the brothers, they're going to totally listen to him." And here's the lesson that Jesus is going to tell. He said to them, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced even if someone rises from the dead." Jesus is foreshadowing his resurrection. He's like, look, I'm going to die and I'm going to come back to life, and if by your logic, everyone's going to listen to me. If you read the Bible, you know. Like, oh, Jesus is back from the grave, and there's still people who are like, no, I refuse to believe in him. So, Luke chapter 16, this parable, we thought was about, it's like a tour of what hell is like. But it turns out, no, that's not what this is about at all. It's about if your wealth and power is your identity, not even the resurrecting power of Jesus can soften your heart. But isn't that the greatest power? The power to, doesn't Jesus say this? He's like, yes. But Jesus says, not even somebody coming back from the grave can soften a hardened heart. Don't let money become your identity. Don't let your power become your identity. Because if you're stuck in your ways, according to this Greek folktale, you'll receive the negative side, the short end of the stick, in multitudes. Now, if you're like, Pastor, really? Luke 16 is clearly about hell. Come on, right? It's like, no, it's about this. As a matter of fact, in chapter 16 of Luke, what we just read, this is another teaching that Jesus taught in the same chapter. Listen to this. No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Right? Like, this is like the whole chapter of 16 is about people whose identity is obsessed over power and money. And Jesus is like, if you don't understand what I'm trying to tell you, let me tell you an ancient folktale to show you how important it is to not make money your ultimate goal. Money is nice. You can use it to do things, right? But if that becomes your sole, like, deity, that's the thing that you worship. I'm willing to hurt people for the sake of making myself rich. I'm willing to build walls and ignore the humanity in other people so that I could keep more of the stuff for myself. He's like, be careful. That's what this story is about. Now, the first group of Christians who followed Jesus, and after Jesus died again and rose again, and they're like, oh, this is cool, we want to follow Jesus. These people, they started something called the church. And in this church, people were like, let's live according to the ways of Jesus, and they devoted themselves to doing that. But over time, some churches started losing the plot. Imagine that, right? Churches losing the plot. Never happened, no. But as the churches started to grow in the first century, there's a group of people who lost the plot in a church in a city called Corinth. And so Paul, being one of the first church leaders, he wrote a letter to them saying, you guys need to shape up. And we have that letter, and this is how that goes. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. In the following directives, I have no praise for you, for your meetings do more harm than good. This is what he's saying. I heard stories about the church in Corinth. You guys have devoted yourselves to live according to the ways of Jesus. But I've heard that your church gatherings are actually accomplishing the exact opposite. Well, what is it, Paul? What did we do wrong? Well, in the first place, I hear that when you come together as a church, like we always do, there are divisions among you, and to some extent, I believe it. It's like I heard stories about how when you come together, the thing that, like remember when Jesus died on the cross, it was to recognize, there's many reasons why he died on the cross, but one of the main reasons is to bring unity amongst people, to break down the dividing wall between Jews and Gentiles, men and women, all that stuff, right? He said, when you come together, you're actually building walls amongst each other. So in a way, you should probably not meet anymore because meeting is actually accomplishing the opposite mission of Jesus. So this is what I think you should do. So then, when you come together, it is not the Lord's Supper you eat. So in those days, they would, come together and they would share a meal together, right? For when you are eating, some of you go ahead with your own private suppers. As a result, one person remains hungry and another gets drunk. So we're talking about communion here. Like, we're going to take communion today. But he's like, something is up with your communion. Like, when you come together and you're supposed to break bread and eat together, I noticed that the rich people are eating first, and the poor people, they get the scraps. Like, this is supposed to be one big family thing, but you're like, what's going on here? Let's keep going. Don't you have homes to eat and drink in? If you're hungry, shouldn't you just eat at home before you come to church? Or do you despise the church of God by humiliating those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you? Oh, certainly not in this matter. So N.T. Wright, about this verse, this is what he says. And in case you have no idea what's happening here, he breaks it down for us. This is what he says. When you go to church today, you almost certainly won't get a whole meal, right? You get pieces of like crackers and bread. The normal practice today for centuries has been to provide a token or a symbolic meal, a small piece of bread or a wafer, and a small sip of wine, or in our case, grape juice, right? Like that's what we're used to today. But back in the day, like in the first century church, early Eucharistic meals, meaning communion in the first century, took place in private houses, not a special church building. So in the first century, they didn't have church buildings, they had homes. And so people would say, my house is big enough, why don't we have church at my place? That's what they used to do. And there was a full meal served. It wasn't just bread and juice. They had like chicken and pork and sushi. I don't know what they ate, but they had a full meal, right? And during which the special words were said over a particular loaf of bread and a particular cup of wine. So they would do like this body, this bread represents the body of Christ that was broken for you, and this wine represents the new covenant that was shed for, they'll do that thing, but they'll have a whole meal for that. Next slide. Now the problem in Corinth was that this full meal had become a sign of social divisions that ran through the church. Like how could communion, meaning people coming together, how could communion become a dividing thing? Well, he explains to us. Sometimes they had a small main dining room in these homes, right? And that was for themselves and their closest friends, where excellent food and wine would be served. But then they had another room, like a smaller room, a bigger room so more people could fit, or a sequence of rooms where food and drink of poor quality was served. So imagine you can come to my church and we'll have church there. And it's like, oh, you can't come to this room. This is where the rich people eat. Poor people eat over there, right? In Corinth, the rich hosts whose house were large enough for a Christian meeting were continuing this social practice at the Lord's Supper itself. So a good way to describe this today would probably be this. Let's just say, I'm like, I noticed that in this church at Westlight, we have, rich and poor, we have men and women, we have straight and queer, we have like a wide variety, right? We have people who are employed, non-employed, but you know what? We want to be one, right? So you know what? Let's have a picnic. And so here is the picnic basket. And some of you are like, oh, I'll bring some blankets for us to sit on. So you bring out your blanket. Oh, look, it's purple. And when people are trying to sit, it's like, oh, wait. No, this is for me and my family and my friends who are rich. I brought a blanket for you. I'm going to give you this raggedy, torn up thing, right? And then it's like, somebody's like, oh, I brought some food. Like, oh, okay, well, let's see what food we have. It's like, oh, no, sorry, that food is not for you. This is for us. As a matter of fact, there's some other things in here that's just for us. We actually brought a table, and we brought some chairs, and we had some candlesticks and wine glass, and all this good stuff. I was trying to figure out what to put here, and my wife was like, cheese is like a fancy food, so make sure you put cheese in there. I thought pie was good, but no, cheese. Okay, and avocado, because we're from California. Well, what did the poor get? Well, this chicken was good, so we'll give you like a drumstick, which, according to my son, is like the best part of the chicken, so you'll be happy with that. Okay. So, I'm sorry, next slide? Is the same slide? Okay. So, what was meant to be a meal that's supposed to bring the whole church together, the wall of separation was getting more and more defined. It's accomplishing the exact opposite, Paul would say, right? The Lord's Supper is supposed to communicate that people are more than how the world sees them. When I'm out there in the world, when people look at me, all they see is that I'm poor. All they see, like in my case, they would say, all they see is my social status. All they see is that I'm an Asian male. All they see is the kind of car that I drive, or all they see is the job that I have, or all the world sees is my sexuality, or all the world sees is how I dress, or how, what my religion is, or whatever. Fill in the blank, right? And the communion was meant to be a practice, a ritual that we do that, like, the Lord's Supper reminds us that the image of God is in all people. Communion was supposed to be a practice where we looked at other people around the table. We don't see the color of their skin. We don't see any of that. We see the image of God in them. And the church in Corinth was doing the exact opposite. And for people like that, Jesus would have a parable about a rich man and a poor man who built a wall between him and the other person. And after they both died, he still feels that he's he's better than everybody else. So, originally we thought Luke 16 was a story about, here's a tour of hell. Don't you want to avoid it? No. What chapter 16 is really about is how the world sees when we look at the world, we see a us versus them world. But in reality, what Jesus wants us to think is, no, it's not an us versus them world. We all have the image of God. We're all human beings, and we all ought to love and care for one another. Amen? So what we're going to do today is we're going to take communion. We're going to practice what we just preached, okay? We have 2 stations. Pastor Stan, you want to take this one? Okay, well, I'll be on the cool side. There's no separation here, guys. Hopefully there. And what we're going to do is we're going to do the usual stuff. We're going to take the bread, and we're going to tell you this bread represents the body of Christ that was broken for us. And this juice, we don't have any communion cups today, so we're using paper cups. And the cups, it's going to have grape juice in it, and we're going to say, this cup represents the blood of Christ. It represents a new covenant. That's the usual stuff. But this time, I want you to do something extra on top of that. before you take your bread and your juice and you partake in it, I want you to look at the other people around the table with you. And this is optional, guys. You don't have to come up here, but we invite you to do it. And as you look at each other, I want you to recognize the image of God in the individuals around the table. Amen?